Good morning. For today's scripture lesson, I'll be reading from Psalm 126, the New Revised Standard Version. It is a song of ascents. When the Lord restored the fortune of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us, and we rejoiced. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the watercourses in the Negev. May those who sow in tears reap with shouts of joy. Those who go out weeping, bearing the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, carrying their sheaves.
And dear friends, especially with those few closing verses of this psalm about sowing and reaping and turning of the fortunes, hopefully for better. One thing which was coming to me, and you know that I'm from Europe, not from that part of Europe, but I know enough about European geography and agriculture and so on. Ukraine was coming to my mind all the time because that is an bread basket of Europe. And I needed to control myself. I will return to that, but first I want to talk to you about this psalm. And we will end with considering the situation there. Because there is so much and beautiful and deep in this psalm. Really concentrating just on those last two verses. I need to mention that every culture, known to me at least, every culture has myths, legends, and rituals associated with their staple food. So hunters have their practices of abstinence and their dances before they go for hunting. And they have their totemic animals which they, for instance, don't hunt, and they have others which they do. And they have explanations and legends about it. I know from Hawaii that there is a staple food is taro, which is like that kind of root system of a marshy plant. And they have legends in which they see that taro is a personification of their ancestor sibling. And now they are being kept alive by its sacrifice. And they are constantly replanting the crown of that taro. They eat that root there, but the rest, the stalk, they will replant. And they keep that clone all the time going. And with other Polynesians, they share the story about the origins of breadfruit. And it was supposedly their ancestral father who gave his life for his starving family. And this is how he is still feeding his children. The farmers from the Middle East, those who first domesticated cereals, perceived grains or seeds as divine, as a presence of God among them, as a deity who was buried in the fields and came to life in plants and in harvest, expanded and shared that life force with all the humans, with the farmers. It is this myth as old as agriculture. It means thousands of years old. And thousands of years older than any written records of it. Because people learn writing much later, several thousand years later. And this myth about divinity being scattered into fields and then coming to life and feeding children is present all around ancient Near East, as well as in classical Greece, for instance. Echoes are present in the Bible. Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians in chapter 15, when he speaks about or trying to explain the resurrection or resurrection of the dead, the hope of resurrection for his congregation in Corinth, he goes back to this metaphor, to this image of dying and rising seed. And in Gospel of John, it is put directly on the lips of Jesus. It is there where Jesus explains why he has to die, so that he can yield plentiful harvest of hope. Those are New Testament echoes. In our Psalm 126, those are echoes also. Sowing in tears, reaping with shouts of joy. There is a powerful message for each and every one of us in this, about the mystery of life, about transcendence of life, which is present in self-giving and in self-sacrifice. Our lives have meaning. We reach eternity if we share. If we share our lives. Of course, we want all to live happy and long lives. But true and deep meaning of life, true and deep meaning of life is not in quantity, any quantity. It's not in length, but it is in transcending our individual lives and sharing them with others. Albert Schweitzer called that reverence for life. But for him it was more than just reverence. It was sharing of gift of life with all other living beings and creatures. Expanding, sharing, making life possible all around us and after us. Just like that sown seed is giving itself to bring abundant harvest in the next generation. Now, paraphrasing slightly, Jesus of the Gospel of John in chapter 12, that's where I already mentioned that. This is the next verse. Jesus explains that further. He says, if you hang on your life in this world, you cannot but eventually lose it. If you care nothing for your life, if you freely share, you are keeping it for eternity. That is for me the foundation of social justice and also eco-justice. Protecting and expanding life all around us. But friends, there is also a collective meaning to this image, especially in this specific psalm. It is a pilgrimage psalm, and it was recited or sang in or at the occasion of the high holidays. Pilgrims were returning to the temple, gathering from all the land. The pilgrims had been scattered like seeds to all corners of the world, but now they are returning. They are coming back from all directions, and as they are getting closer and closer to the temple, you can see them more obviously. They are gathering together like those sheaves at the time of harvest in ever-growing processions. My Protestant ancestors used this image when they called themselves diaspora. That word is, of course, a word from Hebrew Bible. Actually, it's a Greek word, but from the Greek translation of Hebrew Bible. But it started to be used exactly for that scattering of people, refugees or exiles. First with Moravians, who were scattered into exiles by Habsburgs, persecuted for their faith. And they started to call themselves diaspora, the scattering. Scattered seeds, either hoping to return, like we have it in our psalm, or even more, prepared to bring benefits and harvest wherever they were at that time, accepting that destiny given to them, or fate, you can call it, that they might not ever return, but giving their harvest in the place where they were scattered. What a beautiful and hopeful and faithful image it is. Just think about it. Of those whom we call these days refugees. They are not poor, desperate, wretched outcasts and exiles. They are either to bring harvest home, or if they cannot do that, enrich those lands to which they were sent, to which they were sown. We know it ourselves in many different ways from our own experience in our congregation with our refugees, how much they are actually enriching our understanding, spiritual and real cultural understanding of their culture, our culture, and the entire world. What a gift they are. They are not a burden. Now, sowing and reaping cereals, and I mentioned that at the beginning of my homily. Life and death, exiles and refugees. It is impossible. It's impossible not to think about Ukraine at this time. That land of deep black fertile soil, bountiful harvests, and now also a great suffering. for us to really understand what is going on and to understand also Ukrainian heroism. We must talk about Holodomor. Have you heard about Holodomor? Some. We talked about it in one coffee hour when we still prayed and hoped that this will not come to pass before February 24th, the day of attack against Ukraine, when it started. I think we were like 2 weeks ahead of that, and we paid attention and dedicated our coffee time to that. But Holodomor, what is it? Artificial famine in one of the most fertile lands of our planet. Artificially created famine. 4 million Ukrainians were murdered by man-made hunger, by Russian bureaucrats from Moscow. Ukraine, as a state or as a land, was surrounded by army so that no one can get out and no one can get in. It was turned into an enormous hunger camp. Only 2 British journalists made it in and reported about. Because no one could believe it, that this fertile land is a place of hunger, and hunger is bad. Gareth Jones and Malcolm Muggeridge figured that out. And Jones jumped from the moving train in Kharkiv in order to report and take few pictures which survived. The 4 million I mentioned is the lowest estimate. The higher or highest are going up to 10 million people killed. But even with 4 million, even so, such numbers are similar to Auschwitz. It was a genocide, never admitted by the perpetrators until today. And then imagine the horrors to hear the other Russian head of government publicly saying that Ukrainians aren't really a nation, that they really do not exist. With this in their still living memory. Because this happened in 1932, 1933. Yes, it is a long time ago. But friends, those are the days when my grandfather was starting to be a minister on his first church. Many of your grandparents were alive. My parents were about to be born at that time. So it is not that long ago. This is still in their living memory. And they are being told that their nation is not really a nation and they do not exist. Now you know why Ukrainians are fighting like lions. They are fighting for their survival and for their children. Their women and children are now being scattered. in surrounding countries, while many of their men are ready to give up their lives for their children, so that they would not be Holodomor again, dying again, hunger in the breadbasket of Europe. The psalmist assures us it is a divine dream that refugees will return from where they were scattered, where they were dispersed. They will return and bring back abandoned harvest. Their tears will be replaced with shouts of joy. We know that happened with exiled Israelites or Judahites when they were taken to Babylon and then they could return back. And there were many examples of those who were scattered and were able to return. Or, as I mentioned, a broad harvest in their new lands. But there'll be always this tears and cries associated with the hope of joy of return. And that is the dream of divine sheaves. Hope that life is stronger than death. Our hope against all hope. Let us keep hoping for ourselves. And at this time, for Ukrainians.